This is part two of my two-part series in which I'm sharing my experience designing my very first crochet pattern for the 2025 Amigurumi.com Rainbow Design Contest. I'm May, and this is May's Crochets. I'm a beginner crocheter sharing my learning to crochet journey. I've only been crocheting for a few months now, and I didn't think I would be designing my own patterns for quite a while, but I will link my part one video here. In that video, I talk all about my discovery of this amigurumi.com design contest for 2025 that has a rainbows theme and how I love rainbows. And I felt inspired to kind of try to come up with something for myself, even though I'm quite a beginner and have never designed a pattern before. So here we are in part two. I designed a pattern and I entered it into the contest, and I want to show you my design that I came up with and talk through the entire process from beginning to end. I'm super excited to kind of talk through this with you. So without further ado, here it is. I'm calling this Stack a Rainbow Mountain. And basically, each one of these is a colored like slice, I guess, kind of a horizontal slice, and they build up to make a mountain. Here's sort of the snow-capped peak of the mountain in white, and the rest are rainbow colors, and they come apart. So you can play with this however you want. It's kind of modular, it's like blocks, and I gave this to my 3-year-old to kind of mess around with, and he had a lot of fun with it. I mean, it's kind of fun to stack it up this way. He kept calling it cake, which it does look like a layered cake. And there's just like, I mean, you can play with it all kinds of different ways. Super, super fun. And it was such an interesting process of designing. So I want to talk through just like all kinds of different things with designing this pattern, starting from the very beginning. So I had the idea in my head of this. I knew, again, I'm a beginner crocheter. I knew I needed to keep the shapes really, really simple. I wasn't going to be able to do anything too complicated. And so I had this idea of sort of the stacking mountain pieces that I had an idea of how I would do. You know, the top is basically just a bunch of rounds. The bottom is a bunch of rounds, and I thought about the idea of you can do back loop only to kind of make that like edge. I've done other patterns that had something like that, and so I wasn't 100% sure how it would pan out, but I kind of had the idea in my head of how I was gonna do it, and that the shapes were somewhat simple. So when I dove in, let's say, I didn't start with the white top, which I have, of course, now lost. Here it is. I wanted to start with like these slices, the sort of, I'm calling them kind of like trapezoids, but they're really just, I don't know, these sort of horizontal slices to kind of get the pattern figured out. And I started with like maybe red or orange or yellow. I didn't want to get too big until I had kind of figured out the basics. So interestingly, I think when I very first started, I had the idea that I would start from the bottom and work my way up. And looking back, I'm not sure why I thought that. I think the bottom like piece, I guess, is bigger. And so the idea was that I would start with like more rounds, and then I would back loop only and then start to decrease as I went up. And then I would decrease all the way down until the middle, and then I would close it up. And so I would do it all in one single color and do that all the way. And I wonder if I think pretty quickly I realized that decreases are messier than increases and that I should flip that. Instead of working from the bottom up, I should be working from the top down. And so start with the top set of rounds and then back loop only, and then increase a little bit to make it a little bit wider, and then back loop only, and then start closing up the bottom with decreases. And so I kind of figured that out at some point early on, that I wanted to be working top down versus bottom up and preferring increasing over decreasing, but I was still planning on using decreases to close the bottom. I have a few initial versions of my slices here. I've got a couple of red, I've got a couple orange. And the other thing that I started off with is typically with amigurumi, you do a spiral. So you just start and you just keep going, going, going. You use a stitch marker to mark like the first stitch of your round, so you know when you finish a stitch, but or when you finish a round. But otherwise, you don't really know. You just kind of keep going, and it spirals outward. So my first few of these, I don't know how much you can totally tell. Actually, don't know if this is one of them. Okay, let's see. Uh, it's like it spirals out, and the problem with that, with a pattern like this, I think you can sort of see it here, is that we need these to stack really nicely on top of each other, and with the spiral it doesn't end up perfectly even. So I think this was like an attempt at what I was saying. So I was spiraling out, starting from the top, doing a couple rounds, back loop only, increase, increase, back loop only, decrease, decrease, decrease. But because of the spiraling, it ends up with this kind of uneven part where you're like, especially when you're like switching to back loop only. Um, yeah, I think you can see it sort of here a little bit. It's just like, it's not smooth, it's not flat. You can see it maybe there, right? You see, okay, there we go. That's a good example. You see this big sort of jump, and so it doesn't end up lying flat. So a while ago, I had done a pattern from Repeat Crafter Me, which was a crocheted pencil pattern. And in her patterns, she does, instead of doing the spiral method, she does you join and then chain. So you join, you do a round, you join it with a slip stitch, and then you chain one and kind of start the next round, go around, and then you join it with a slip stitch, chain one, go around, join it with a slip stitch, and it comes up with these like concentric circles that for that crochet pencil pattern. I think you could have also done it with spirals, maybe okay, but that's sort of the way that she does her patterns. And I realized, at some point as I was doing my sort of prototypes of some of these little slices, that it would make a lot more sense to try to do it that way, with the concentric circles, join and chain, so that they end up really, really even, like the circles on the top end up really, really even. And then each of the rounds as you go down is much more even, and they stack really nicely on top of each other, as opposed to kind of ending up with these like jagged little edges here that make it so that the stacking is not so nice. So I pretty quickly sort of switched tack with that and decided on doing the joining and chaining process instead of the spiraling process. So I kind of switched to that pretty quickly. So that was one big thing. Another big thing, let me actually show you. So, and here's, I got again a bunch more. Here's my snow-capped examples. I have my little prototypes here that I had to experiment with to kind of figure out the way that I wanted to go with this. I actually made an entirely other second one, or first, I should say first one, which is here. Take a look at this one. So, big learnings here. So this one I had figured out to do the chain and join method as opposed to the spiraling method. So that's what I did for this one. And I thought, like, this is it. This is the real thing. I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it in solid colors was my plan. I had my colors picked out, and I started working my way down. I will say there was a lot of challenges with this one, of just like getting the sizes correct and making them nicely stack one on top of the other. It was a really interesting sort of first experience of trying to figure out how to design it, even though I had these simple shapes in mind, trying to figure out like, how do I actually get these to stack correctly? How do I get it to increase the right amount so that it's not too little, but not too much? So I had to kind of undo some of these and redo them and do some frogging and all of that to get it to work correctly. But I thought that this was going to be it, that this was going to be my final pattern. And so this one, yeah, it has the joining method, and it has everything that I was talking about before. You start at the top, you do back loop only, you do some increasing, and then this does have the decreasing method, and you decrease, all the way down to the middle, and then sew it tight with a embroidery needle. So you can see all of my pieces for this. And it came out fine, but I really didn't love the bottoms. I was having trouble actually figuring out exactly how to, like, it makes a lot of sense when you do the top spiral. You're basically adding an extra stitch every time with the increase. So you go from like, I don't know, 5 single crochet and an increase repeated all the way through to 6 single crochet and an increase and repeated through to 7 single crochet and an increase and repeated through. But for some reason, when I was trying that sort of similar backwards method for decreasing, it came out kind of messy. So I wasn't super sure about that. And so I ended up basically switching. I decided partway through that it would be cleaner to actually make the spiral, or not spiral, make the, starting from a magic ring and making the concentric circles out for the bottom as well, and then sew it on. And so that's what I did for the final, my final pattern here. And I also, meanwhile, had the idea about using different colors. And so let me show you one up close. So this is the top. And then this is the bottom, right? So it's so much neater, right? Then again, the old one, here's the top, but then the bottom is like so much messier. And so I also had the idea, like at one point, of maybe doing some embroidery, like along the maybe this top edge or along this bottom edge to kind of like offset each of the slices. And then I realized I can really accomplish that pretty easily by just using different colors. And so what I ended up doing in the end was I picked sort of the lighter version of the colors for all of these. I did the top in the lighter color, around. And then I joined for this edge loop, for this edge round of doing of the darker color that I wanted for the sides, I did back loop only there, and it comes out with this kind of cool looking like hashed, like almost like embroidery that would come out, and that's effectively just from joining the color and doing back loops only. It ends up with this really cool look. So switch to the dark color, do the increasing rounds, and then with a whole nother, piece of yarn, the light color, just start again with a magic ring and do these concentric circles, one round larger than the top. And meanwhile, these sides had increased by 6 stitches total. So it's one round bigger. And then, so make this entire spiral, and then with the embroidery needle, whip stitch the bottom to the top by going through the both loops of this part and then just the back loop of this part. And again, you end up with this sort of hashing kind of thing that looks like embroidery that kind of matches up the top. So I'm really pleased with how this came out. I thought that was a cool way to kind of get some more colors into this, as well as make the bottoms like just so much neater. I mean, look at this. Let's compare. Yeah, so that was definitely an interesting experience of kind of partway through deciding that I wanted to kind of switch up how I was doing it. Another big piece of this, let's talk about stuffing for a minute. So here we go. Look at that. Look at how neat that is. For all of these, I did my decreasing, and then, before I closed it all the way up, I stuffed. But yarn is flexible and especially as they get bigger and bigger and bigger, getting the stuffing kind of the right amount was really, really tricky in a way to like have them actually stack on top of each other. So it's all very bendy. Like the tops are flexible, the bottoms are flexible. It's hard to get it to sit flat. And it's also hard to stuff it and have it stuffed, but not have it like exploding out in any direction, the top, the bottom, the sides, and in any direction. And so you can see it's sort of like, almost like they're more like donuts. Like you can see them all kind of sticking out the sides a little bit. Maybe I stuffed a little too much for some. But then for some, it's like, it feels very like the purple one at the end, I stuffed a ton, and then it was like way sticking out and everything was like it wasn't standing nicely. You can almost still see it. Maybe I still stuffed too much. But I had seen other patterns at one point, actually the crayons that I did, which I can link to here. I had done some crocheted crayons following a pattern, and they actually had suggested the idea of for the bottom of the crayon that's supposed to kind of be flat. They had talked about the idea of putting a piece of something inside of the crayon, either like cardboard or a piece of plastic or canvas. I think they mentioned canvas, with the idea that it would help it to sit a little bit more flat. And so I thought I might try something like that. Let me actually put some cardboard into the top and the bottom to try to get these a little bit more sturdy, a little bit more straight, especially for this toy that's supposed to be stacking. And so that is what I did for these, and that's I think why these came out stacked so much more nicely. So what I ended up doing was I did all my crocheting, and then I just had a box and I cut out a piece of cardboard that was like the size of this circle, and cut out another piece of cardboard that was the size of this circle. And when I was ready to assemble it all, I kind of had this top portion upside down. I put the smaller piece of circular cardboard at the bottom, stuffed a little bit, all the way around, to kind of fill in the gaps, fill in the area between the top and the bottom, and then put on the bigger piece of circular cardboard, and then took the bottom rounds that I had made, and then did the whip stitching all the way around. And it came out like, look, this is so much more sturdy, right, as compared to this. Like this, it's really just, you can sort of versus this one, it's flat on the top, flat on the bottom, and makes it so much easier to actually stack them and to have them sit kind of flat and play with in sort of a modular kind of way. So these ones are fun too, but it just doesn't stack quite as nicely. So that was definitely, I still ended up with this, and my 3-year-old really enjoys playing with honestly both of them, which is great. It's also fun to compare, like this is the solid colors, fully solid, as opposed to the offset colors. One other thing I want to point out before I forget is, so I had done the chain and the join and chain method, which is great, but one thing that does happen is that you do end up with like a seam. So you can see the seam kind of running down there. You can see the seam running down this side, and you can see the seam running down on the bottom. I am wondering, now that I ended up switching to doing this bottom, assemble separately and then sew it on, I do wonder if maybe I could do the spiraling technique, at least for the top and the bottom, because in the end, that one doesn't matter as much. Like, we don't need that part to be super even. We just really need the sides to be super even. And so it had made sense when I was doing it all in one piece and then kind of doing the decreasing on the bottom. But I do wonder, maybe if I were to do this again, I could try the spiraling. I also think there are ways to do this with less of a seam if you do some fancy stitching where I've seen videos, but I haven't actually tried it, if you want a little bit less of a seam. But honestly, the seam is not a huge deal, not super noticeable, but it is there. So I did want to mention that before I forget. That's one of the sort of drawbacks of doing that other joined rounds method. So that's it. I called it Stack a Rainbow Mountain. You can play with it lots of different ways. My original idea, I had some sort of additional ideas that I was thinking about that I ended up not going with. My original plan was that it was gonna be these sort of individual solid colors for the stacking mountain. And then I had the idea that I would do some embroidery on the outside of the mountain. So I had a few ideas for that, but the one that I had kind of landed on that I ended up sort of abandoning, but maybe in the future, was the idea of doing, in these lighter colors that I also had, I was thinking of embroidering like lines going down. So like, let's say we have a light blue line that goes all the way down, all the way down, and then a light purple line, all the way down. And then it's almost a little bit more like a puzzle, so you can both stack it and also turn to line up these different colored lines, to kind of line them up correctly. And then also it's like a secondary rainbow. It's another sort of set of colors that make a rainbow kind of all the way around if we did the lighter versions of all of these colors. So I thought about doing that. I had also considered a bunch of other ideas, like the idea of almost doing more of shapes embroidered on that would line up. So like almost like embroidering a star on the side of the mountain, or a cloud, or a river, or something that would then line up. And you can kind of treat it a little bit like a puzzle. But then when I ended up switching and doing kind of the embroidery or the whip stitching to get these kind of lighter versions of the colors offset on the top and bottom, in the end, I decided there's enough going on here. I already have sort of the other sets of colors, and I'm gonna just let this be what it is. This is already complicated enough. And I was worried about kind of muddying it by adding something extra that then didn't, maybe made it a little bit more complicated and messy looking in the end. But I still, I could always try it. The nice thing about yarn, I could always like try doing it and then I can always undo it and it's not the end of the world. You can just sort of take it out. So I don't know, maybe I'll still play around with it, or especially on this one, with these sort of more solid colors. But I'm worried that it would end up a little bit more messy or muddy and kind of lose the focus of the main part of the pattern. But I think it'd be fun because it's already sort of a play thing. I think it'd be fun to add that real puzzle element to make this a little bit more of a real puzzle. So I did think about that. Maybe in the future I will experiment with that. So yeah, that is my pattern. Stack a rainbow mountain. So I entered into the contest and voting is actually now open. So I believe that voting on amigurumi.com is open for this contest through November 17th, 2025. So if you're seeing this in the next few days from when I post it, definitely take a look at that. I will put the link in the description box below for voting. It's actually really, really cool. Everyone can vote for 10 designs, and I think there's there's just over 300 entries. It's really, really fun to see all of the different entries. People are so creative. There's so many cool ideas, and everything has rainbows. Some it's really solid, strong rainbows like this. Some it's like a more rainbow accents on like an animal or things like that. But it's really fun to see all the different designs. And so you can vote for 10 of your favorite designs, and if you vote, you get entered into a raffle to win. I think there's 3 voter prizes. So it's just a really fun way to kind of get the community involved, take a look at all these different fun patterns, and vote. So I will put that link in the description box below. If you are seeing this before November 17th, 2025, definitely take a look yourself and cast your vote. I think there will be a way, if you're seeing this after then, to still go back and view kind of all of the entries. So I will update that description when the time comes, so you can at least still see, hopefully, the entries. I just think this is such a fun thing. Again, I love the rainbow theme. And this prompted me to design my very first pattern, which I'm sure I would not have done anytime soon if it wasn't for this contest. I have ideas for all along. I've sort of thought at some point I will try designing my own patterns, but it's like far, far away. But as soon as I saw the rainbow contest, that's really just inspired me. I love rainbows. I thought, let me just try. And it was such an interesting process, such an interesting learning experience. I mean, the shapes that I came up with are relatively simple, but getting everything to like line up nicely was really, really a challenge. Like in some ways, I think I made it. In some ways, this is like an easier design than some of the others because the shapes are simple. But in some ways, it's a little bit of a harder design than some of the others because it's so geometric and you kind of need everything to like line up nicely. That was a little bit of a challenge. And so, yeah, it was just such a fun learning for me. I will think about if I want to kind of iterate on this and, think about maybe trying to post this pattern for other people to try making. But I think this is such a cool experience. It was hard. Like, I'm not going to lie. It took me a long time, especially through all of my different iterations here. And like, these very quickly get much, much, much bigger. And so I think this very final round is like, I think it's like 90 stitches and it's like really, really big. I should say too, just before I forget, this is made with Premier Basics worsted weight yarn. I had added a whole ton of colors of this, and so it was perfect, a perfect worsted weight yarn to do this project with, and I had a great experience working with it. So there we go, my very first pattern. Hopefully more to come in the future to design my own and maybe iterate on this one. But I will say, like, this definitely kept me busy for a couple of weeks. I think I'm ready now, let me go back to kind of working on some other patterns that are made by other other designers. And I think that it will give me an extra sort of eye as I work on other people's patterns to sort of think about how they're constructed, to really think about the mechanics of like building up these shapes. Like now that I have the experience of trying to design something myself, I think I can really focus when I'm working on other people's designs of like, how did they come up with that? And like, if I design for myself in the future, think about the shapes and think about the patterns and all the different methods. And I think I'll just have an extra sort of appreciation for how they design it themselves, as well as an eye towards how I can kind of do more designs for myself in the future. So there we go. My very first design, Stack a Rainbow Mountain. Go vote if you can. But yeah, I think that's it for today. Whoopsie, here goes my mountain. Thank you so much for keeping me company, and I'll see you next time. Bye.